بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. والثاني وهو أول أقسام الآحاد ما له طرق محصورة بأكثر من اثنين، وهو المشهور عند المحدثين، سمي بذلك لوضوحه. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions والثاني in the second type وهو أول أقسام الآحاد, and it is also the first category of ahad. Ahad will be explained in the coming pages inshallah. It is ما له طرق محصورة بأكثر من اثنين. It is that which has limited chains but there are more than two. What is this called? وَهُوَ الْمَشْهُورُ عِنْدَ الْمُحَدِّثِينَ. According to the muhaddithin, it is mashhur. Why it is called mashhur? سُمِّيَ بِذَلِكَ لِوُضُوحِهِ. It is called mashhur because of it being so apparent. This is the start of a new chapter, the chapter of mashhur. And it is the second type of narrations. So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah commences by saying وَالثَّانِي وَهُوَ أَوَّلُ أَقْسَامِ الْآحَادِ, and the second, and it is the first type of ahad. Now to understand what he means here, we need to revert back to Nukhbatul Fikr, the original text. So in Nukhbatul Fikr, the text is as follows: وَالثَّانِي الْمَشْهُورِ. The second type is mashhur. It is عطف on والأول المتواتر المفيد للعلم اليقيني بشروطه. Basically, there are two ways of categorizing and grouping narrations. The first is based on the amount of the narrators and the number of asanid. And the second is based on the knowledge that a narration gives. These are two ways of dividing narrations. So there are two broad categories based on the knowledge that a narration conveys. The first is mutawatir and the second is ahad. Ahad in turn has three subcategories. It is mashhur, aziz and gharib. Mashhur is the first from this group. And this is what Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah meant by the statement that وَالثَّانِي وَهُوَ أَوَّلُ أَقْسَامِ الْآحَادِ. It is second, mashhur is second when comparing it with mutawatir. But it is first when comparing it with the other subcategories of ahad. And this is the division according to the muhaddithin. Hanafis divide narrations in a very different way. Basically, the Hanafis look at the division from the perspective of ittisal, how well connected the asanid are, and there should be no missing links. So based upon this, Hanafis divide ahadith into three categories. Very briefly, these three categories are: the first is mutawatir. What's mutawatir according to Hanafis? It is when all the asanid, all the chains are fully connected and a person is left with no doubt at all because so many people are narrating the report to him. So it is as if he heard the narration directly from the person who is being quoted at the end. Why? Just because there is such a huge group of people who are narrating it to him, and there was this huge group in each and every link. So that's mutawatir. The second is mashhur. Now this is very different from what Ibn Hajar is explaining. So very briefly we'll explain the Hanafi definition now and then we'll elaborate more upon it later, inshallah. So mashhur according to Hanafis is when the chains are muttasil, they are well connected, but there is still room for doubt. Why is there room for doubt? This is because the initial narrators, the Sahaba, they were very few in a number. So there were very few Sahaba who narrated the report, but after that the narration became so widely circulated that the entire Ummah accepted it. That's the second type. And then the third category is khabrul wahid, which is also called ahad. It is when the chain is muttasil, it's connected, but there is doubt from all angles. So we'll inshallah explore this division of the Hanafis, and we'll explain it in more detail. We'll also inshallah refer to al-madkhal ila usul al-hadith. But for now, this is just a point to keep in mind, that Hanafis divided ahadith into mutawatir, mashhur and ahad. So there are three main categories, whereas muhaddithin divided ahadith into two main categories, and that is mutawatir and ahad. So according to Hanafis, mashhur is a separate and independent category. The muhaddithin then put mashhur, aziz and gharib under the umbrella category of ahad, whilst the Hanafis, they consider mashhur to be completely separate and a completely independent category, and only aziz and gharib come under the group of ahad. There are some isolated views amongst the Hanafis, but this is the mainstream view. An important point to keep in mind here is that this division is merely to organize narrations and to place them into perspective. So some scholars, including quite a few recent scholars, they object to this division and categorization, and they state that we took this definition from the philosophers. Like Hafiz Thanawullah al-Zahidi, he mentions, أما تقسيم الخبر إلى التواتر والآحاد ثم تعليق إفادة القطع واليقين كله مع الآحاد فليس أصلا من أصول المسلمين، إنما هي أقسام وتقسيمات ومقدمات ونتائج تكلم فيها مناطقة اليونان أولا وتأثر بها فيما بعد الفقهاء والأصوليون من المسلمين الذين درسوا كتب المنطق والفلسفة اليونانية وتكلموا بلسانها وتمسكوا بكلياتها وجزئياتها تمسك المقلد الأعمى. So he's saying that this categorization of ahadith into mutawatir and ahad, and then saying that you get firm conviction from mutawatir narrations, etc. He says this has no basis amongst the Muslims. إنما هي أقسام وتقسيمات ومقدمات ونتائج تكلم فيها مناطق اليونان. That all this is categorizations and groupings which the Greek philosophers first spoke about. وتأثر بها فيما بعد الفقهاء والأصوليون. This here is very important to take into consideration, because the answer is in his objection. He's saying that the fuqaha and usuliyin, so it's not the average Muslim, it's not the general masses that took this from the Greek philosophers. Rather, it is the fuqaha, great stalwarts, experts, very learned and knowledgeable individuals, who he is saying that وَتَأَثَّرَ بِهَا, they became affected with this, الَّذِينَ دَرَسُوا كُتُبَ الْمَنْطِقِ, when they started to study the books of the philosophers. Thereafter he says that they began to speak according to how these Greek philosophers spoke, and they followed them very blindly. So this is what he mentions. Now, even if this is true, what is the problem with that? There is no issue at all, because the division is only to put a system in place. So if they took it from the Greek philosophers, there is no prohibition in that, and there is no problem at all. Basically, the scholars, they notice that now we are moving further away from the golden era of prophethood, and now there are more links that are coming in the chains of transmission. So they felt that it's necessary to group the ahadith so that they are well organized, and then it becomes very easy when we need to pass a verdict and or a ruling, when we need to grade these narrations. So for this, if they observe that a system was already in place and it only needed to be tweaked and refined, then there is no harm in this. Because bear in mind that like we're saying that he's mentioning what أثر بها فيما بعد الفقهاء والأصوليون, that those who were putting the system in place, they were fuqaha and usuliyin, they were experts and they were very knowledgeable scholars. The muhaddithin then refined these categories. So in this way, it is a united effort and a combined contribution of the fuqaha and the usuliyin and even the muhaddithin. So there is no problem at all with that. This is just like how you have schools and universities and seminaries. So in the past, lessons would be conducted in the masjid, isn't? It is only much later that dedicated places for learning was built and syllabuses were introduced and courses were put in place, and all this was just so that there could be a system. So no one argues that we cannot have formal madaris with grades, like you have grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and examinations. The student can only go to the next grade if he passes. No one says that this year is prohibited, it's bid'ah, just because this concept is from non-Muslims. It is just for there to be a system. But they could raise an objection that you have very senior scholars from the very early times who also objected. So to answer that, we say that if you have to study history, then it becomes very apparent that there was always some opposition when something new was introduced. So the same applies here. This is no different. In the beginning, you have some scholars who oppose this division. And inshallah, we will dissect the statements of those scholars and we will analyze exactly what they are saying in the lessons of Muqaddamah Ibn Salah, inshallah. But for now, we challenge those who object on this division of the fuqaha and the usuliyin and the muhaddithin, and we request and demand from them to present a systematic and orderly way of categorizing the noble ahadith. So we ask them that we have now these thousands of narrations that are transmitted through much lengthier asanid. In these chains, we have some narrators who are outright liars and fabricators, whilst others are honest but they had weak memories. Now what happens if we have multiple chains like these? We also have chains that are transmitted by reliable narrators with good memories, but their narration contradicts others. So in order to understand the grades and the statuses of these narrations, if the current categorization is not good enough, then we tell them that you bring for us an order. You categorize them for us so that we can understand the status and the ahkam of each narration. So this shows that there is really no problem at all. There is no issue if we take the system from others and we also improve on that. And this here is also if they have an issue with categorizing a hadith, then the same can be said with regards to writing a hadith and then placing them into different chapters and different sections. From where did the Muslims get this? So yes, there were many who were not happy with this in the beginning. In fact, if we can go right back to the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum, and we can even prove from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself that they prohibited the writing of a hadith. But everyone agrees now that it is permissible to write a hadith, and it's also permissible to put them into different chapters and even to publish those works. So this is the system which was taken from the non-Muslims. Therefore, the same way that we interpret the prohibitions of the Prophet ﷺ and the earlier scholars with regards to writing a hadith, we can also interpret the statements of the scholars who opposed the categorization of a hadith in the beginning. Coming back to the text, we will first explain mashhur according to the muhaddithin, and inshallah we will then explain how the Hanafis defined the term. So Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he says, وَالثَّانِي وَهُوَ أَوَّلُ أَقْسَامِ الْآحَادِ. And the second type, that is mashhur, it is the first type of ahad. Now here there is an objection on the sentence structure, that writing wathani and thereafter saying wahuwa awwalu aqsamil ahad, this is not the best way to phrase the sentence. It's not the best way to put the message across, because remember who the target audience is. It is the beginner. So phrasing it like this will become rather confusing for a beginner. He's not going to understand what's going on. What you're saying that it's second, and then you're saying that it's the first type. So this comes about because Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is merging two books. If you look in Nukhbatul Fikr, the text is Wathani al-Mashhur. The second category, or the second type is Mashhur. And the sentence وَهُوَ أَوَّلُ أَقْسَامِ الْأَحَادِ, this here is from Nuzha an-Naḍar. So this is how Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he categorized both books. This is how he combined both books. This is how he made and blended Nuzha an-Naḍar with Nukhbatul Fikr. But even then, some scholars claimed that he could have combined both books and still explained it in a much better way. So they suggested that he could have phrased it by saying وَالثَّانِي مَا لَهُ طُرُقٌ مَحْصُورَةٌ بِأَكْثَرَ مِنْ اثْنَيْنِ وَهُوَ أَوَّلُ أَقْسَامِ الْآحَادِ. And the second is that which has limited chains but more than two, and it is also the first type of ahad. This would have made it more clearer for the beginner. Nevertheless, looking at the tarkib, based on how Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah structured the sentence here, Thani will be the mubtada, Mashhur is the khabar, and everything that is in between is the jumla mu'taridah. In English you can call it the parenthetical sentence. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah gives a definition of mashhur by saying ما له طرق محصورة بأكثر من اثنين. It is that which has limited chains that are more than two. This is how he defines mashhur. So he's describing mashhur as that which has more than two chains, but the total number of asanid, the total number of chains is limited and confined. It's mahsura. So it does not reach the amount of mutawatir. By saying that the minimum is more than two, it simply means that there must be at least three in every link, isn't it? Could be that there is three, or it could even be that there are more than three. So it could be 4, 5, or even 11, or 12, or 13. In the end, basically, it must be mahsura, and this is how it will differ from mutawatir. So this is all that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentions for the definition here. This is how he defines mashhur. That what is mashhur? It is that which has confined, which is the number is confined, but it is more than two. That is how he is defining mashhur. However, if you look previously on the first line of page 44, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah explained that mashhur could be such that it is not confined, but it falls short of any of the other conditions of mutawatir. So turn back to page 44. Look at the first line. Look there. He mentions وَخِلَافُهُ قَدْ يَرِدُ بِلَا حَصْرٍ أَيْضًا. Bila hasrin aydan, that the opposite of mutawatir is that which is also not specified. Lakin ma'a faqad ba'd ash-shurut, but it does not fulfill any of the other conditions of mutawatir. أو مع حصر بما فوق الاثنين. So that means that there are two ways in which a narration can be mashhur. The first is that it is confined, like how he's explaining here. But the second way, which he explained 2 pages back on the first line of page 44, is that the number is not confined, but it does not fulfill one of the 4 conditions of mutawatir. So therefore, if a narration is transmitted by hundreds of individuals, say lots and lots of people, so it's not confined, but they are transmitting something which was not perceived by the senses. So remember, the condition of mutawatir is that it must be perceived by the senses. But these people, they are unlimited, but they are transmitting something that is not perceived by the senses. Then this will be mashhur. Likewise, If a narration is transmitted by thousands of reporters, but it was very possible for all of them to agree on a lie, then based on what he explained on the first line of page 44, such a narration will also be considered as mashhur. It will not be considered as mutawatir, but it will be considered as mashhur. That's how he gives the definition there. So basically what it means that the four conditions of tawatur that were mentioned earlier, mashhur doesn't fulfill any of those four conditions. Now this is very necessary and important, because when you are defining something, you have to explain it fully. So therefore, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimullah ought to mention that mashhur could be in one of these two ways. Likewise, it was also essential for him to explain that with mashhur, a person does not obtain absolute knowledge. Although he mentions it later, but he ought to mention it here, so that the definition could be complete. Therefore, we say that this explanation that he gave and this definition that he presented is incomplete. Sheikh Ibrahim Lahim, he suggests a better definition for mashhur. He says, فَيَكُونُ تَعْرِيفُ الْمَشْهُورِ, that the definition of mashhur will be مَا رَوَاهُ ثَلَاثَ فَأَكْثَرُ, that three or more narrates it, في كل طبقة ما لم يستوفِ شروط التواتر, as long as it does not fulfill the conditions of mutawatir. So look at how this definition is. It's three or more, but it's not fulfilling any one of the conditions of mutawatir, that is mashhur. And he says ثلاثة فأكثر. So he's not specifying that it has to be mahsura, that it has to be a confined number. Rather, it could be even unlimited, as we're saying. It could be an unlimited amount, but because it's not fulfilling any of the other conditions of mutawatir, it will still be considered as mashhur. Nevertheless, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah explained here the one way in which a narration could be called mashhur, and that is when they are limited chains. But he does not clarify what he means when he says limited. So Allama Baqa'i rahimahullah, he objects to the use of the word mahsura, and he states that when you are saying that it is mahsura, then the number has to be defined. If it is limited, then what is the final number? So it has to be limited up to a specific amount. Up to which number is it limited? Allama Munawi rahimahullah quotes him as saying, بأن الحصر إنما يكون في شيء بعينه كما مر في تلك الأقوال 15 12. You remember when we were speaking about mutawatir, then some have given a specified amount, but they said that it must be 15, it must be 12 إلى آخره. وأما 3 فصاعدا فليس بحصر. Just saying that it must be 3 or more, this here is not confining it. However, Allama al-Laqani responded to this objection by saying, أي ما له أسانيد محصورة باعتبار مبدئها بأكثر من 2 وهذا صحيح. It is that which has limited chains considering the beginning number, that the beginning must be more than 2. This is what is correct. So he then quotes the objection of Allama Baqa'i, and thereafter he says غفلة عما أشرنا إليه إذا ما فوق 2 معين بالنسبة لمطلق العدد. He says that he is ignoring what we indicated towards, since saying that it must be more than 2, this here is specifying the number. However, this response of Allama al-Laqani is not valid, because Allama al-Laqani is focusing on the lowest number here. And by focusing on the lowest number, it does not then differ with mutawatir, because you can even say that mutawatir has to be at least more than 2. So the objection is on the maximum, because mashhur differs with mutawatir based on the maximum. The maximum amount of mashhur is not equal to the lowest amount of tawatur. This here is when taking into consideration the condition of kathra and the condition of mashhur of mahsura. Another point to note here is that Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is saying that there must be a minimum of 3 narrators in every link. So this is his view, and this is the view that became popular after him. That for a narration to be mashhur, there must be more than two. That means there must be at least three narrators. If there are three or more narrators, then that narration has it has the potential of being mashhur if it does not fulfill any of the other conditions of mutawatir. In contrast to this, Allama Ibn Manda rahimahullah, he stated that there must be at least four or more in every link. So he is giving one number more. He's saying that there must be a minimum of 4 chains, and only then will a narration be mashhur. If there are only 3, then according to Ibn Manda rahimahullah, the narration will be aziz and it will not be mashhur. So his student Ibn Tahir al-Maqdisi, he quotes him saying, فَأَمَّا الْغَرِيبُ مِنَ الْحَدِيثِ كَحَدِيثِ الزُّهْرِيِّ وَقَتَادَةَ وَأَشْبَاهِهِمَا مِنَ الْأَئِمَّةِ مِمَّنْ يُجْمَعُ حَدِيثُهُمْ إِذَا انْفَرَدَ الرَّجُلُ عَنْهُمْ بِالْحَدِيثِ يُسَمَّى غَرِيبًا فإذا روى عنهم رجلان وثلاثة واشتركوا في حديث يسمى عزيزا. So the point here is that we're saying وَإِذَا رَوَى عَنْهُمْ رَجُلَانِ وَثَلَاثَةً. If you have 2 or if you have 3 who are narrating, then it will be called aziz. And then he says فَإِذَا رَوَى الْجَمَاعَةُ عَنْهُمْ حَدِيثًا سُمِّيَ مَشْهُورًا. It must be more than 3, then only it will be considered as mashhur. This is what Allama Ibn Manda rahimahullah has mentioned. Many scholars followed Ibn Manda rahimahullah, and amongst others Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah, he also held the same view that there must be 4 or more, then only will the narration be considered as mashhur. If there are only 3 narrators in any link, if that's the lowest amount in any link, then the narration will be called aziz. So this is the view of Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah. Even though Allama Munawi rahimahullah, he claims that Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah held the view of 3, that if there are 3, then it will be considered as mashhur. That is incorrect. So in Yawaqit wa Durar, Allama Munawi rahimahullah wrote, وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ مَا جَرَى عَلَيْهِ الْمُؤَلِّفُ مِنْ أَنَّ أَقَلَّ عَدَدِ الْمَشْهُورِ 3 هُوَ مَقْتَضَاهُ كَلَامُ ابْنِ الصَّلَاحِ. He's saying that what Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is mentioning here, that there must be a minimum of 3. This here is what could be taken from the kalam, from the statement of Allama Ibn Salah. It is what the words of Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah necessitated. And then Allama Al-Laqani, who relies heavily on Allama Munawi's commentary, he also wrote مَقْتَضَاهُ كَلَامُ الْمُصَنِّفِ مِنْ أَنَّ أَقَلَّ عَدَدِ الْمَشْهُورِ 3 بِهِ يُشْعِرُ ظَاهِرُ كَلَامِ ابْنِ الصَّلَاحِ. That the statement of the author that implies that the minimum of mashhur is 3, this is also what is understood from the apparent statement of Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah. However, if a person refers to Muqaddama Ibn Salah, then it is very clear that Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah preferred the view of Allama Ibn Manda rahimahullah. So under the chapter of mashhur, Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah presents a different meaning of mashhur that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is still going to mention ahead. So that's how he defines and explains mashhur. He doesn't mention anything of mashhur having a minimum of 3 or 4. And then he also explains that mutawatir is a type of mashhur, and then he concludes the chapter of mashhur. On page 270, he brings the chapter of gharib and aziz. Now these are 2 terms which are coming ahead. But under this chapter, he cites that statement of Ibn Manda rahimahullah. So he's explaining aziz and gharib. And he does not comment on what Allama Ibn Manda rahimahullah mentioned about mashhur. So there are 2 points to note. That the first is he's accepting the definition of aziz. That means if there are 3 narrators, it will be considered as aziz. And he is also not criticizing him or rejecting the definition that Ibn Manda rahimahullah gave for mashhur. So look at the text in Muqaddama Ibn Salah. Allama Ibn Salah rahimahullah mentioned it as follows: النوع الحادي والثلاثون معرفة الغريب والعزيز من الحديث. روينا عن أبي عبد الله بن مندى الحافظ الأصبهاني أنه قال: الغريب من الحديث كحديث الزهري وقتادة وأشباههما من الأئمة ممن يجمع حديثهم إذا انفرد الرجل عنهم بالحديث يسمى غريبا. So this here is the chapter of غريب, and he's accepting this definition of غريب. وإذا روى عنهم رجلان وثلاثة واشتركوا في حديث يسمى عزيزا. So it looks like he's also accepting the siyam. فإذا روى الجماعة عنهم حديثا سمي مشهورا. So in short, basically it is not correct to attribute to Ibn Salah rahimahullah that he held the view in accordance with what Ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned here. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah is the one who is specifying it to 3 or more. Thereafter, Allama Munawi rahimahullah, he takes the names of others who stipulated that for a narration to be mashhur, there must be 4 or more narrators at every link. He says, لكن اختار ابن الحاجب تبعا للآمدي والإمامين والغزالي أن أقله ما زادت نقلته على 3 ما لم يبلغ حتى التواتر، وهو رأي مأثور عن النظام وجزم به البلقيني ومال إليه الكمال بن أبي شريف. So he's saying so many scholars they preferred the view of Allama ibn Manda that there must be a minimum of 4 narrators in every link. The lowest amount of narrators in any link must be 4. Then a narration will be considered as mashhur. If there are only 3, it will be aziz. So he mentions وَمَالَ إِلَيْهِ الْكَمَالُ بْنُ أَبِي شَرِيف. So he quotes Kamal ibn Abi Sharif. Kamal ibn Abi Sharif, he says very strongly that al-qawlu bi-thalatha gharibun, that the opinion of saying that there is a minimum of 3, that is weak. Allama Munawi rahimahullah then quotes Ibn al-Jazari rahimahullah, what he mentions in his Manzuma: وَاصْطَلَحُ الْمَشْهُورَ مَا يَرْوِيهِ فَوْقَ ثَلَاثَةٍ عَنِ الْوَجِيهِ. That the meaning, they officially regarded mashhur as that which is narrated by more than 3 from a person who is exalted. So in this poem, Ibn al-Jazari rahimahullah, he adds another condition, and that is that the 3 narrators are transmitting from a wajih, which I translated as a person who is exalted, just to make it rhyme with narrated. So the meaning of wajih is an rawin dhi wajahin wa qadrin, from a narrator who has a high social standing and great esteem. So this is a condition which Allama Jazari rahimahullah is mentioning. However, this here is not a condition for mashhur. It is not necessary to relate from a reputable person. Mashhur has nothing to do with the quality of a narrator. Rather, mashhur is based on the quantity of narrators, 3 or more or 4 or more. So Allama al-Qani rahimahullah, he said, أي أن راو ذي وجاهة وقد رأوا اشتراط هذا ضعيف والصحيح خلافه بل لا فرق بين وجيه وغيره والله أعلم. There is no difference between a wajih and others. So the point is that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah accepted that a narration which has a minimum of 3 narrators in one link is called mashhur, whereas other scholars before him, they claim that if there are only 3 narrators, then such a narration will be called aziz. To be mashhur, there must be 4 or more. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah now qualifies this by saying indal muhaddithin, according to the muhaddithin. So the reason for this is because of the close meaning between the technical meaning of mashhur and the literal definition. Allama Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he qualifies the statement and says that this is according to muhaddithin. Basically, it is a technical term. It's the technical meaning of mashhur. So Kamal ibn Abi Sharif, he comments: إشارة إلى أن كون المتواتر قسما من المشهور ليس من اصطلاح المحدثين. Remember I told you that Allama ibn Salah rahimahullah, he mentions that mutawatir is a type of mashhur, but Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, here he is subtly refuting Allama ibn Salah rahimahullah, that saying that mutawatir is a type of mashhur, this is not according to the muhaddithin. Why? لما قدمه من أن المتواتر لا يبحث عنه في في علم الإسناد بل هو اصطلاح أصولي والمشهور عند المحدثين هو مقابل المتواتر. So مشهور is totally different. It's the total opposite of mutawatir. Basically a condition of mutawatir is not being fulfilled, and therefore we are referring to that narration as mashhur because it has more than two narrators, but it doesn't fulfill one of the four conditions of mutawatir. And Kamal ibn Abi Sharif, he mentions that it is precisely for this reason that Hafidh ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned earlier, فَكُلُّ مُتَوَاتِرٍ مَشْهُورٌ مِنْ غَيْرِ عَكْسٍ, that every mutawatir is mashhur but not vice versa. Now looking at the meaning of mashhur, so linguistically mashhur comes from the word shahura. Ibn Manzur, he claimed that the word is used for despicable things that become common, for bad things that become common. So he wrote, الشهرة ظهور الشيء في شنعة حتى يشهر الناس. That shuhra, it's a bad thing that becomes evident and people publicize it. So this is what Ibn Manzur mentioned. But then there were other lexicographers, they differed with this, that why are you specifying it to only something that is bad? But after them again, there were those who supported Ibn Manzur and they argued against those who criticized him. So in Tajul Urus, Murtada al-Zabidi, he says, فَقَوْلُ شيخنا القيد بالشنع غير معروف ولا يعرف لغير المصنف محل تأمل. نعم ذكره الجوهري من غير قيد فقال الشهرة وضوح الأمر. So he's saying that when our ustad, when our teacher is saying that when you are confining it to something that is bad, this here is not known in Arabic, and he claims also that besides this author, no one else knows about it. So Murtada Zabidi is saying that this is a point of contemplation. It's something which should be reviewed. Yes, Imam Jawhari, when he mentioned it, he did not confine it. So ultimately from Imam Jawhari, scholars accepted that mashhur can be used for anything that becomes manifest and popular and apparent and famous, irrespective whether that is good or bad. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah says, سُمِّيَ بِذَلِكَ لِوُضُوحِهِ. It is named thus because of its apparentness. In Al-Yawaqit, Alama Munawi rahimahullah, he quotes Alama Baqa'i rahimahullah, that he mentioned that it would have been better if Ibn Hajar rahimahullah rather said لِذُهُورِهِ instead of saying لِوُضُوحِهِ. Why it would have been better? So that the text can match with what the lexicographers say. So he quotes, وَلَوْ قَالَ لِظُهُورِهِ كَانَ أَبْلَغ لِأَهْلِ اللُّغَةِ فَإِنَّهُمْ قَالُوا الْمَشْهُورُ ظُهُورُ الشَّيْءِ. That when you go to the dictionaries, they're explaining mashhur with the words ظُهُورُ الشَّيْء. They're not saying وُضُوحُ الشَّيْء. So just so that it can match better with the experts in lugha, it would have been better if Ibn Hajar rahimahullah used the same word. However, Alama Qurani rahimahullah, he dismisses this by saying ليس بشيء لأن الظهور بمعنى الوضوح. There's no need to make a mountain out of a molehill. It has no merit because ظهور comes in the meaning of wuduh. Likewise, Al-Malaqani rahimahullah, he also rejected this because of no proof being presented. وَأَنْتَ خَبِيرٌ بِأَنَّهُمْ لَمْ يَأْتِ عَنْهُمْ بِمَا يَدُلُّ عَلَى مَرْجُوحِيَّةِ اسْتِعْمَالِ الْمُرَادِفِ وَهُوَ مَحَلُّ النِّزَاعِ. There is no statement that mentioned that you cannot use a synonym, a word which has the same meaning. So you could use, if you say لِظُهُورِهِ or if you say لِوُضُوحِهِ, it's the same. There were actually lexicographers who used the word wuduh when defining the word shuhra. For example, Jawhari, he said in as-Sahah, وَالشُّهْرَةُ وُضُوحُ الْأَمْرِ. So see, he's using the word wuduh. Likewise, Ibn Faris, he also defined it with the word wuduh in Mujmalul Lugha. So to sum up all that was discussed thus far, there are scholars who use the word mashhur if there are a minimum of 4 narrators in every link. So that was before Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he prefers that even if there are a minimum of 3 in any link, then too the narration will be called mashhur. The third point is that mashhur does not fulfill any, it's above 3, and it does not fulfill any of the other conditions of mutawatir. And the fourth thing is to note is that Hanafis have a different meaning for mashhur, which we will inshallah discuss. One additional point, and then we'll conclude inshallah, is that unlike mutawatir, we mentioned that for mutawatir it is conditional that there should be a large group even in the era of Sahaba. For mashhur, you do not have to look at the amount of companions. So that means if you have one Sahabi who's narrating, and after the Sahabi in every link there are 3 or more according to Ibn Hajar, or 4 and more according to the others, then it will still be considered as mashhur. Munashabir Ahmad Uthmani rahimahullah, he writes, وَالْمَشْهُورُ عِنْدَهُمْ أَنَّهُ لَا يُشْتَرَطُ فِي الْمَشْهُورِ وَالْعَزِيزِ التَّعَدُّدُ فِي الطَّبَقَةِ الْأُولَى فيسمون الحديث مشهورا إذا رواه في كل طبقة 3 فأكثر وإن كان من رواه من الصحابة أقل من 3. So even if there are less than 3 companions, but after that you have 3 companions in every link, a minimum of 3 companions, then such a narration will be considered as mashhur. Inshallah we'll continue from here. Jazakumullahu khairan. Subhanallah wa bihamdi. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka